Hey tribe, tonight we kick off with a mind-bending journey into the surprisingly wild world of prehistoric recreational rituals. Long before pyramids or written history, our ancestors weren't just inventing fire and drawing on cave walls. They were also discovering ways to send their minds on some truly trippy adventures. So before you settle by the fire, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really dig these stories from the dawn of humanity. And drop a comment telling me which cave or modern city you're watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always wild to see where the tribe gathers. Now, dim the fire, maybe toss an extra fur over your shoulders, and let's drift into tonight's ancient odyssey together. Let's start with what might have been the Agu Stone Age party trick, the mysterious laughing root. Imagine the scene. Woolly mammoth bones scattered around, tribe elders hunched over a flickering fire, and at the center, a bundle of strange roots passed from hand to hand like some prehistoric peace offering. But this root wasn't just for show. The oldest cave paintings show figures waving these roots, faces painted with broad, dopey grins. Archaeologists believe the laughing root had both sacred and mildly psychoactive powers. That's right, even cavemen liked to get a little floaty after a long day of hunting or dodging saber-toothed tigers. Preparation was simple. Mash the roots, soak them in fermented berry juice for days, then drink up at tribal gatherings, ceremonies, or any time you needed to tune out the sound of the drummers pounding away until sunrise. The result? A soft, dreamy euphoria enough to make you forget the ache in your back and start thinking the neighbor's cave paintings look deep. Of course, our ancestors didn't call it getting high. They said they were communing with the spirits. The laughing root was believed to connect the tribe to the great spirits of the land and sky, perfect for moonlit rituals or rites of passage. Sniffing or drinking the root concoction was a way to inhale the mysteries of the world. And honestly, probably a great way to unwind after a day of outrunning predators and gathering firewood. You see it everywhere in cave art hunters clutching roots, families sharing it around the fire, even ceremonial burials with roots tucked in alongside stone tools. The logic seemed to be, if I'm traveling to the great beyond, I might as well go with a smile. Practical. But these roots weren't just ceremonial. Tribal festivals could get wild. Laughing root brew made the music thump, the dancing get wilder, and the cave poetry just a little more profound. Picture a group of cave folk under a starry sky, passing around root-infused berry wine, feeling as light as a feather and howling at the moon. For prehistoric people, that was spiritual fulfillment and probably the best night you could have without Wi-Fi. Every tribe had their own wild celebration. And then there was the legendary Feast of Forgetting, the Stone Age equivalent of, let's see who remembers anything tomorrow. Subtle? Not really. Accurate? Absolutely. This annual blowout honored the mighty sky spirit, who, according to legend, once threatened to flood the land in a fit of anger. But after a night of dancing and feasting, the tribe offered up so much laughing root that the sky spirit fell asleep and woke in a much better mood. Disaster averted thanks to a little prehistoric chemistry. To remember this heroic hangover, the tribe gathered every year to, well, it absolutely blasted. Not just spiritually, literally. The goal was to drink until you reached the dreaming place, which sounds mystical until you realize it often meant waking up face down in the mud, surrounded by your tribe howling with laughter. The ritual began at sunrise with drumming, chanting, and ceremonial rounds of the root brew. Tribal shamans encouraged everyone to drink until you see the spirits, which, in context, was less a blessing and more of a dare. People pounded drums, danced around the fire, and claimed to see visions of the sky spirit, though whether that was really the sky spirit or just the reflection in a puddle was anybody's guess. But this wasn't just chaos for chaos's sake, well, mostly not. The idea was to honor the balance between wildness and wisdom, reminding everyone that even angry spirits could be calmed with enough root juice. Think of it as Stone Age spirituality meets prehistoric party animal. And best of all, this was sanctioned behavior. Nobody had to feel awkward about waking up in the elder's hut or asking what happened last night in the sacred grove. Getting spiritually buzzed was basically part of the job description if you were a member of the clan. In fact, if you didn't pass out by the end of the big ritual, people got suspicious. What's wrong, Thorg? Why aren't you seeing mammoths in the clouds? Are you against the sky gods, or just bad at fun? Modern scholars might call this a ritual of renewal, but for cavemen, it was more like a spiritual cleanse through wild abandon, and probably some gut-wrenching purging, too. The morning after? Headaches, regret, mysterious bruises shaped like wild boars, and if you were lucky, a sense of having touched the spirit world. Maybe you even invented a new type of club during your visions. The point is, this was prehistoric soul washing, not just an excuse to wake up covered in dirt. But forget everything you know about beer, ale, or anything you drink at a modern bar. Caveman brew was nothing like a golden, bubbly beverage. It was thick, lumpy, and alarmingly alive. Picture this, a chunky, porridge-like mess sloshing around in a cracked stone bowl, with bits floating in it that might or might not have been part of last week's dinner. This wasn't just a drink, it was a challenge. How did our ancestors make this prehistoric spirit soup? Simple. Grab whatever edible roots and tubers you've got, mash them with half-burnt bread or wild grains. Soak everything in water from the nearest, hopefully not too muddy, stream, and let it sit until it started to bubble and smell a little funky. If it didn't crawl away on its own, it was ready to drink. The result was a calorie-packed, mildly intoxicating slop more like oatmeal, with ambition than anything you'd see in a craft brewery. This liquid bread was the lifeblood of the clan. It was food, drink, and mood elevator all in one. Everyone had some: hunters, shamans, grannies, toddlers with a strong stomach, and anyone else trying to survive in a world where saber-toothed cats and freezing nights were just part of the daily grind. But here's the wild twist. The brew wasn't just for nutrition. At big rituals or moon festivals, the tribe's shaman would spice things up literally. Want to talk to the ancestors? Toss in some strange berries or leaves nobody could name. Want to forget about that embarrassing mammoth hunting fail? A handful of wild honey or old fruit juice might just do the trick. Sometimes mystery ingredients found their way in. Was it deliberate, or was someone just trying to prank their neighbor? Historians are still debating. As for hygiene, well, let's just say water could kill you. But at least fermented soup was boiled, left to sit, and flavored with whatever made it taste less like mud. The alcohol content? It ranged from mildly tipsy to why is the sky spinning. The truth is, most of the buzz came from quantity, not quality. Big clan projects, like moving rocks to build a new shelter or dragging home a mammoth, were fueled by this sludgy brew. Some days, it was less about building history and more about not dropping the rocks on your own foot. Let's talk prehistoric beer. Or, to be honest, a murky, bread-adjacent soup that modern brewers would call a crime against humanity. The method: soak roasted root bread lumps in water, mash it into a stew, and let the wild yeast work its magic. The end result: cloudy, chunky, and occasionally chewy. Imagine a smoothie made by someone who hates you, but with enough kick to make you forget about saber-toothed tigers for a night. But despite the texture and taste, which was, let's be real, probably awful, everyone drank it. Chiefs, elders, children, anyone who wanted to feel a little less worried about tomorrow's hunt. Why? Because when plain water could knock you out and goat milk was a gamble, prehistoric brew was the safest bet for staying hydrated, getting your calories, and catching a little buzz to make cave life bearable. Communal pots were passed around, and nothing built spiritual unity like 5 adults sharing soggy, sour bread water. During festivals, the shaman might throw in special herbs, honey, or the good roots for extra effect, sometimes for visions, sometimes just to keep things interesting. No glass bottles, no foam, just stone bowls, hollow sticks to catch the big chunks, and a prehistoric commitment to ignoring taste, texture, and dignity. And yet somehow the clan survived. The rituals went on, and the legend of the laughing root lived to see another moon. Now that you've survived a bowl of grain porridge brew and a sniff of wildflowers, it's time to set the mood the caveman way with smoke. But not just any smoke. We're talking about the original prehistoric incense, Sunstone Blend, the scent that filled caves with aromas so strange, even the tribe's saber-toothed skull-wearing shaman had to ask, "Wait, am I meditating? Or did I just invent fire twice?" Prehistoric incense wasn't a quick stick of dried grass. It was a carefully hoarded mix of pine sap, wild honey, old berries, crushed petals, a splash of fermented fruit, and whatever else the shaman found in a tree hollow. Mash it all together, shape it into little clay balls, let it dry on a sun-baked rock, and toss them on the communal fire. Within minutes, the whole cave was swirling with sweet-smelling smoke, and everyone forgot whether they were honoring the spirits or just high on fresh air and mushrooms. The main goal? Ritual purification, which in ancient tribe speak means, let's burn enough stuff in here to erase our sins and whatever happened at last night's. Howl at the Moon contest. Caves weren't exactly known for their cross breezes, so you'd find yourself wedged between a sweating elder waving a mossy firepot and a bored hunter using feathers as a fan, while the youngest members droned a chant that was mostly ooga ooga and humming. Visions weren't just welcomed, they were expected. Whether it was a visit from the ancestors or just a lack of oxygen, no one complained. The spirits got their offering, and if half the tribe started seeing mammoths dance on the walls, so be it. To the clan, this incense wasn't just air freshener. It was medicine, perfume, and the express elevator to the world of dreams. The old storytellers later claimed that Sunstone Blend could cure snake bites, bring restful sleep, and make the cave smell less like wet dog. All likely true if you measure success by everyone's lying down and drooling. The recipe? No two clans agreed. Sometimes it took 16 different roots and flowers, each gathered at the right time of the moon. Honestly, it's a miracle anyone remembered how to light a fire by the end of the instructions. But once burning, the scented smoke drifted through the cave entrance like a prehistoric fog machine, announcing that something holy or weird was going on, or just masking the smell of last week's mammoth jerky. Even after death, the aroma lingered. The honored dead were wrapped in animal skins stuffed with incense, so their souls would float to the sky gods smelling like a berry patch instead of guy who lost the last hunt. If Sky Petal was the chill friend who brought berries, then Fire Smoke was the drama queen with a head full of pine cones. But nothing compared to the shaman's favorite, mandrake root, the ancient world's wild card. Mandrake was the legendary plant that looked just a little too much like a tiny, twisted human. The tribe didn't just use it, they whispered about it. You'd find it ground up in medicine bundles, buried under sacred stones, or, on special occasions, mashed into the night's vision stew. Was it for pain? Sure. Was it an aphrodisiac? Sometimes, though that always got a laugh from the elders. Mandrake was part medicine, part dare, and all mystery. The Tailies said a proper dose brought sleep, peace, maybe even a dream message from the ancestors. The wrong dose? Nightmares, wild visions, and possibly a belief you could wrestle a dire wolf with one hand. Some said that pulling the mandrake from the ground made it shriek, so the only safe way was to tie it to a wild dog and cover your ears, a story passed down with equal parts fear and glee. Real or not, everyone agreed. Mandrake was for shamans, vision quests, and anyone brave enough to take a night off from reality. Then there was leaf smoke, what modern folk would call cannabis. Yes, even cave clans figured out that certain plants could take the edge off a toothache, a bad hunt, or a long winter's night. The healers crushed leaves into oil, smeared them on wounds, mixed them with honey, or burned them in the big cave fire. Sometimes it was for sore muscles, sometimes for sore hearts, sometimes just because the fire felt lonely. No cave paintings of rolling joints yet, but plenty of stories about elders who would stare into the embers for hours and emerge with new wisdom, or, occasionally, just a new way to tie a fur belt. And then tucked behind the "don't eat that, it's poison" pile was the sacred poppy pod, the world's oldest painkiller. Not native to every valley, but when one tribe traded for it, word spread fast. The poppy's juice dulled pain, calmed coughs, and made it a little easier to face another day of saber-tooth problems. Did it solve everything? Of course not. But if you were lucky, the shaman would grind it into a paste and offer it for serious injuries, childbirth, or just a particularly epic hangover after the solstice feast. No one wrote down these recipes. No one really knew which plant did what. It was all guesswork, storytelling, and a little bit of daring. Sometimes the shaman got it right and healed the chief. Other times, someone spent 3 days believing they were a bison. Either way, every ritual, every feast, every night around the fire, smoke and roots and wildflowers blurred the line between the spirit world and reality, reminding everyone that, in the end, being a caveman was equal parts survival, faith, and just a little bit of reckless joy. Used wisely, it soothed agony. Used poorly, it turned the cave's healer into a spaced-out background dancer, waving his club at imaginary eagles. Still, in a world of stone tools, saber-toothed tigers, and surprise volcanic ash clouds, a little somnolent magic went a long way. Now, let's talk about wine well, the caveman version. Forget about fancy clay jars or grape vineyards. Here, wine was the proud achievement of some truly experimental foragers. Fermented berry juice, tree sap, and whatever wild fruit didn't bite back. To the tribe, it was more than a drink. It was spirit juice, a sacred toast to the sky gods, and a quick way to go from storytelling to spirit walking. But don't let the roughly chewed wooden cups fool you. This brew hit like a mammoth charge, especially when it was blessed by the shaman with a handful of crushed roots or a scoop of dreamy flower petals. Caveman wine wasn't just for sipping by the fire. It was an experience, a magical concoction, and sometimes an all-access pass to realms of consciousness nobody could name. Special occasions, think solstice feasts, or thank the spirits we didn't get eaten. Parties were when these potent drinks flowed. There was no sipping to appreciate the flavor. The goal was to drink until your soul felt lighter, your worries smaller, and the dancing shadows on the cave walls looked like the ancestors dropping by for a laugh. For headaches, the healer would hand you fermented willow sap wine. For aching bones, bitter root punch. For existential dread, the shaman just shrugged and gave you a double serving with a warning to sleep near the fire, not the cliff. And it wasn't just mortals getting these wild brews. Offerings were poured onto sacred stones, tossed into the river for the water spirits, and shared with the totem animals, because everyone, from the gods to the grumpy old wolves, appreciated a good drink now and then. Some ceremonies ended with wild visions, prophetic dreams, or tribe members waking up with their heads in a pile of furs, convinced they'd spoken to the moon. Depending on the special herbs, a cup could bring healing, courage, or the kind of trance that left you howling at the sunrise. For a tribe so obsessed with tradition, hunting patterns, and where not to poop in the cave, our ancestors had a surprisingly open mind about spirit journeys. In fact, they encouraged them, just not while counting the winter food stash. Trance states were celebrated as proof of the gods' touch, or at least as excellent entertainment. If the lead dancer started shaking and singing nonsense during a ceremony, no one panicked. The spirits had arrived and apparently liked loud drums. Trances were sparked by a time-tested mix. Hours of drumming on hollow logs, repetitive chanting, thick smoke, sleep deprivation, and berry brew with a suspicious color. The result? Prophecies, sudden declarations, and the occasional unplanned faceplant in the ashes. The shaman's job was to play host, inviting the spirits to come on in for a night complete with new voices, wild gestures, and ominous warnings while staring into the fire. Outsiders might see a bunch of people fainting and howling, but for the tribe, this was Wednesday night's main event. Messages from the ancestors or spirits came through sometimes advice, sometimes scolding, sometimes just a mysterious craving for roasted nuts. The trance wasn't always planned either. Sometimes a young hunter would catch the spirit and start shouting, shaking and sweating, with the healer tossing extra leaves on the fire just in case. Were these true messages from the other side? Or just the effect of inhaling smoke and drinking half the moonberry stash? Hard to say. What mattered was that, when it ended, the possessed tribe member usually woke up confused, exhausted, and in need of a strong cup of creek water. The ritual usually ended with a round of delighted grunts, a hearty swig of sacred berry brew, and maybe a nap behind the biggest stalagmite while someone else swept up the holy drool. To modern eyes, spirit possession might look like interpretive dance meets heat stroke. But for the cave tribe, it was the ultimate spiritual achievement, the moment when the world of stone and fire cracked open, and the spirits popped in to share mysterious wisdom, or just to critique the quality of last week's mammoth stew. You'd think dying would be enough to get you out of party invitations. Not for the cave tribe. The line between the living and the dead was more of a flexible guideline, like don't poke a sleeping bear, or don't throw rocks in the cooking pit. The ancestors weren't just respected, they were on every guest list, literally. Whenever the tribe gathered for a feast or a moon festival, they packed baskets with roasted roots, pots of beer porridge, and most importantly, a general bring-your-own-bones vibe. They'd gather by the sacred stone pile, eat, drink, and chat to the spirits sometimes via actual carvings, sometimes just by shouting into the darkness and hoping Grandpa Gruck was listening. Many caves had spirit doors, little carved notches or marked stones, thought to be portals for the dead to pop in and grab a snack, or at least enjoy the smell. Whether this meant ghosts nibbling or just appreciating the gesture, nobody could say. But the tribe believed the dead could still enjoy food, drink, music, and obviously, a bit of prehistoric gossip. So naturally, the ancestors got parties thrown in their honor. Drums pounded, smoky herbs burned, and the tribe poured libations onto the sacred dirt. Sometimes the living got so into it, they wept, confessed embarrassing secrets, or accidentally sat on the chief's best antler headdress. It was like a family reunion, but with fewer fights and way more cave paintings. These gatherings weren't just for remembering. They were spirit trade deals. The living fed the dead, and the dead, in theory, sent back good hunting, strong babies, or fewer nightmares about saber-toothed tigers. Everyone benefited. Sometimes, tribe members even slept in the ancestor alcove, hoping for dream visions-like advice from Aunt Uga. Don't eat those red berries. Or, paint the bison with bigger horns. Sounded creepy to outsiders, but to the tribe, it was common sense. The afterlife wasn't a goodbye, just a move to a new cave. And if Great Uncle Brog wanted to join the feast by drifting through the smoke, well, who was going to say no? But for all the chanting, smoky herbs, and sacred debauchery, prehistoric revelry had a price. And it usually showed up with the sunrise, a splitting headache, and the faint memory of howling at a bear skull. Yes, even when beer was basically soup and blue flowers counted as medicine, the morning after was a universal constant. Ancient cave scribbles are suspiciously silent about hangovers, probably because nobody wanted to carve about their mistakes with a splitting headache. But the evidence is there. Bones left by the fire, mysterious stains on the mammoth rug, and grumpy groans from behind every stalagmite. The tribe had their remedies: chewed roots, cold water from the spring, and for the bold, lying very still and pretending to commune with the spirits, which mostly meant waiting for the world to stop spinning. In extreme cases, the healer prescribed purification, which usually meant eating a handful of foul-tasting leaves and then regretting your life choices for several hours. This will restore your spirit balance, the shaman said. Moments later, your spirit was busy evacuating from both ends. As for the tribe's spiritual leaders, they handled hangovers with grace. They had training, authority, and most importantly, apprentices to carry them home. Meanwhile, regular cave folk woke up with moss in their hair and charcoal smudges on their faces, wondering if they danced with a spirit or just with someone wearing a really convincing bear pelt. Still, nobody ever skipped the next moon feast because spiritual enlightenment was downright addictive, especially when it came with a mug of foamy root brew, a smoky fire pit, and a decent chance of blacking out and yelling your neighbor's embarrassing secrets at a painted bison. When our cave folk prepared for the final big sleep, they didn't just grab their finest mammoth belts and a respectable death grunt. They packed snacks, their best party herbs, and a backup supply of sleeping root, just in case eternity was long and boring. Anyone who thought the fun ended when your spirit left your body had never seen a proper cave burial. The after party just moved underground. Cave tombs weren't solemn or empty. They were starter dens for the soul, stacked with dried fish, honeyed beetle cakes, clay pots of berry brew, and mysterious bundles of herbs, which archaeologists now eye with equal parts awe and terror. Just ask anyone who stumbled into an ancient cave. They found painted walls, bone jewelry, and what looked suspiciously like a prehistoric wellness kit. If a modern influencer got buried by the tribe, it'd look pretty much the same, minus the saber-toothed toothpicks. This wasn't just luxury, it was strategy. The soul needed fuel and stimulation for the afterlife. Eternal bliss wasn't going to run on mammoth bones and boredom. So, the tribe's wise ones made sure every spirit got their favorite snacks, sweet-smelling roots, and a generous chunk of dancing smoke for those endless spirit ceremonies. Sometimes, the burial gifts even included step-by-step drawings on how to enjoy your blue flowers in the afterlife. Apparently, cave ancestors could be a bit forgetful too. And then there was the open jaw ritual, meant to help the dead eat, grunt, and most importantly, chug that sacred root brew in style. Hard to howl at the moon with your jaw clamped shut. All this tells us something simple. The cave tribe didn't separate pleasure from piety. If something made you feel closer to the spirit world, even if it was a flower that made you see woolly rhinos doing ballet, it belonged in the tomb right, alongside your favorite club, your comfiest fur, and maybe a starter pack for wild dreams. The cave folk may not have built pyramids, but they perfected an ancient truth. Sometimes, the people in charge are just high enough to believe they know what they're doing. Sure, the chief wore the biggest bones, but it was the shamans and root mixers who controlled the vibe. They had the keys to the sacred stash, the firewood budget, and the final say on who got to chant next to the smoky pit until they passed out. The spiritual elite weren't just guides. They were the world's first wellness influencers, doling out everything from soothing ointments to full-blown psychedelic stew disguised as holy soup. If it tingled, smelled strong, or made you talk in animal metaphors for 3 days, it came from the shaman's pouch. The chief wore the crown, but the shaman knew how to blend the strong stuff without sending anyone to the underworld by accident. That gave them major power, not just for healing or ceremonies, but for setting the entire tribe's mood. Nobody asked, "How's the mammoth hunt?" They asked, "What did the shaman see in last night's smoke trance?" Spoiler, it was usually a bear, a glowing sun, and a lot of wiggly lines. Don't forget the economic side. The shamans were the best gardeners, land keepers, and even root dealers. Wildflowers didn't harvest themselves. Someone had to find them, dry them, and chant over them until they were ready for the next cave rave. Religion was sacred, yes, but it was also a well-oiled system running on faith, wild herbs, and the occasional mind-melting dose of spirit inspiration. Who ruled the tribe? Forget the biggest club control the smoke pit, and you controlled the future. If the spirits spoke through visions, and visions came after a healthy sniff of funky roots in a sealed cave, well, you do the math. In theory, cave society was all about balance, fairness, and not clubbing your cousin over food. In practice, if you were lucky enough to get your own burial cave and someone to fan you with an eagle feather, you also had access to the good stuff, psychedelic roots, mysterious honey, and a private dream kit not found in the communal soup pot. Mind-altering herbs followed the same rules as everything else. Chief at the top, berry pickers at the bottom, and everyone else politely sniffing wilted leaves and pretending to feel spiritual. Commoners got grain brew and maybe a whiff of mystery smoke if they crouched close to the shaman. The elite? They bathed in blue flower oil and sipped pomegranate brew out of carved mammoth tusks. The strongest stuff opium white root blends, rare honey, imported cannabis moss was sacred or medical, which conveniently lined up with the shaman's personal research. Funny how that worked. Take the chief. The tribe's big boss couldn't handle all that existential dread alone. If his dreams were considered messages from the spirits, then dosing his bedtime stew with a little psychoactive root wasn't indulgence. It was national security. Even in death, the elite kept their stash nearby. Vials of medicine, incense bundles, and clay jars with vague marks, for spiritual use only. One wonders if the gods really wanted that much imported dream moss, or if old Chugga just liked to keep his options open. As for the regular folk, they weren't totally left out, just stuck with watery brew, smoky air, and whatever counted as a spiritual high after hauling rocks all day. If anyone got caught with the forbidden stuff, it was called witchcraft, heresy, or just bad luck. After 14 caves worth of holy sniffing, sacred guzzling, and wild healing parties, what does this all say about the cave tribe? It says they were absolute geniuses at blending survival, spirituality, and a healthy dose of chemical courage. Pain relief and prophecy came from the same root. Medicine and magic walked hand in hand, usually to the beat of a bone drum and the smell of something burning that definitely wasn't dinner. It also shows how much the ancients respected the power of altered states, not as escape, but as a real way to gain insight, healing, or just a visit from the spirit with the biggest horns. Their rituals weren't just pageantry. They were chemical theater, complete with smoke, chanting, and trippy teas for everyone who made the invite list. Enlighten was there for those who could afford the luxury afterlife package. The elite got blue flowers and imported dream honey. The rest got cold brew, and hopefully a vision if they ate enough berries. The biggest lesson? Humans have always wanted to feel more, know more, and, especially, find a reason to skip chores and nap in a smoky cave. The cave folk weren't so different from us. They just painted their hallucinations on stone walls instead of sharing them in a podcast. So, what does this mean for us? Maybe our ancestors weren't wild-eyed druggies or crazy mystics. Maybe they were just doing their best to figure out a confusing, beautiful, sometimes brutal world with whatever roots, rituals, and aromatic smoke they had. And if the road to inner peace meant a mug of honey brew, a handful of flowers, and a trance where you barked at the moon, well, so be it. The clan was absolutely obsessed with art, stick figures, intellect, guessing games, and political intrigue. Who stole my squirrel leg? But also a very specific kind of madness, the obsession with beauty. And not just any beauty, cave beauty. The kind that meant looking like you hadn't seen the sun since last mammoth migration. Even if it meant rubbing weird stuff on your face until you looked more ghost than hunter. Enter Sun Scare Mud, a luxurious silky white face paint made from, you guessed it, actual cave chalk and mystery minerals, the kind that taste a little spicy if you lick them, which most Kavekkids learned the hard way. Across the tribe, everyone from the chief's daughter to the guy who sharpened rocks smeared this glowing mud over their cheeks, foreheads, and even their chests to get that ultra-pale, ethereal look. Because in a world where tan skin meant hauling mammoth bones all day, looking like a winter spirit was the ultimate flex. But this wasn't just a gentle dusting. No, cave folk layered their sun scare mud on like mammoth blubber on a cold night. Some even slept in it, letting it soak in so deep they could wake up looking ready for the afterlife by sunrise. The result, a luminous, ghostly glow right up until the mysterious rashes showed up. When they did anyone stop? Nope. Just slap on more mud, like a prehistoric Band-Aid. one that never, ever healed. And if the mud didn't get you, the swamp shine might. Used to treat blemishes and cover up saber-tooth bites, swamp shine, probably mercury and frog juice, was another charmer in the Stone Age beauty arsenal. Add some fermented berry tonic and moss baths to the routine, and you've got full-blown chemical warfare, all in the name of elegance. Or at least, in the name of getting noticed by the chief's son. Let's not forget the classism carved into every muddy cheek. The most important cavewoman wanted to look untouched by sunlight or hardship. The paler, the better, even if it made them dizzy, confused, or eventually the main attraction at the "Is She Breathing?" ceremony. Looking like a goddess came at a goddess-sized cost. But perhaps the most ironic part, the cave ladies who could afford this toxic luxury also had access to imported flower perfumes from that mysterious valley over the hill, bear fat ointments, and camphor leaf tonics. They literally smelled like flower spirits, while their skin peeled off in sheets. If you had actual eyebrows, you clearly weren't trying hard enough. In the never-ending quest to resemble a cave painting or a particularly fashionable pebble, fashionable cave women plucked their brows and hairlines into oblivion. A high, rounded forehead, the epitome of beauty. So women yanked out rows of hair with sharpened shells, rough animal hide, or just had their sisters chew it out. Family bonding, cave style. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was a weekly ritual of pain, and let's be honest, sibling revenge. For stubborn hairs? A dab of mammoth fat, or if you were feeling especially brave, crushed beetle paste. Yes, beetle paste to thin the regrowth. Some even singed strays off with burning sticks, because nothing says grace like lighting your face on fire. Eyebrows thin, arched, or better yet vanished. A truly sophisticated cavewoman had no brows at all. Instead, she'd draw a faint shadow with burnt stick or charcoal, which looked nice until you sweated it off during the cave dance and ended up with tribal art running down your face. Divine. Meanwhile, body hair? Total no-go. Hair was seen as animalistic and unclean. Women removed it with a paste made from sour berries, hot rocks, and, for the bravest, fire ants. The mixture stung, but hey, it left the skin smooth at least until it didn't. As for the scalp, hair was braided up in wild, tight styles, sometimes padded with fox fur or someone else's fallen hair, the original hair extension. If it didn't match, no problem, just slap a squirrel pelt on top and call it the latest trend. Cave problem solving at its finest. The real twist, all this grooming was done without mirrors. That's right, the only reflective surface was a puddle, and good luck getting your look right with a frog jumping across your mirror every 5 seconds. Your best bet? Trust your cave sister's aim and pray she's not holding a grudge. Once the face had been powdered, plucked, and possibly set on fire, it was time to move on to the body. Specifically, squeezing it into shapes that would make a saber-tooth blush. Enter the stone corset, equal parts fashion statement and orthopedic emergency. These early versions weren't quite the wasp-waisted death traps of later ages, but they meant business. Made from stiffened hide, bent twigs, or if you were rich flattened bone, these were designed to flatten the midsection and make the wearer look like a very elegant boulder. The stiffer your walk, the more virtuous you looked. Bonus points if you fainted gracefully into a pile of furs. Getting into one required help, a lot of hope, and a surprising willingness to lose feeling in your arms. A fully dressed noble cave woman was basically an armored onion, layered, stiff, and strangely delicate. But it wasn't just about looks. These body wraps were moral statements. A straight back meant inner virtue, slouching, moral failure, or possibly demon possession. Underneath, loose animal skins helped with sweat, because newsflash, cave life was not climate controlled. But fashion came first. Comfort? Never. Yet there was a plus. Cave corsets held everything in place. Unlike modern brass, which barely hold a conversation, these stays offered the kind of support you'd expect from a bear hug. You could run, dance, or survive a cave collapse without anything shifting an inch. Of course, not everyone could afford this stone couture. Working women went without, sticking to loose tunics and whatever let them actually breathe. And the worst part? You had to eat while wearing one. Which brings us to the ultimate prehistoric fashion paradox. Feasting like royalty, while trying not to pop a rib or pass out in your own soup. In cave society, beauty didn't stop at the skin. It followed you to the dinner circle, where fashion and food had a complicated relationship. You were expected to attend lavish feasts, show off your rigid posture, but nibble, daintily never gnaw a roasted leg, like a barbarian, unless you wanted to risk a bonk on the head from the chief's wife. You could nibble, you could sip, but you could not unhinge your jaw and demolish a roast hare. That was for peasants, or at least, people not currently trying to breathe. Sometimes just sitting upright for hours and pretending to enjoy cold root stew was enough to trigger a fainting spell, which, honestly, only made you look more elegant, pale, breathless, and collapsing into the arms of a handsome hunter. Peak beauty. Of course, this polite starvation had its limits. Many cave beauties were secretly ravenous by nightfall, sneaking back to their dens to devour a secret stash of nuts or honeycomb. Yes, even the queen of the clan had midnight snacks. She just couldn't admit it. And there were rules for those too. Some foods made your skin shiny bad. Some made it glow good. Some made your stomach angry and a corset terrible. Cave cuisine was as much about survival as style. You paced your eating carefully, or risked indigestion, bloat, or, worst of all, a truly unladylike cave burp. The horror. While cave dudes got to sprawl by the fire, drink fermented berry juice, and grunt about that one epic bison hunt, cave women became masters of elegant restraint, eating just enough roast root to seem sociable, but never enough to mess up the sacred line of their fur robe. Once the face was caked in sun-scare mud, hair was plucked, the mammoth hide corset laced tight, and the food politely nibbled. It was time to tackle the final frontier, smelling expensive. In Caveman days, your scent wasn't just a finishing touch. It was a survival tool, a social weapon, and sometimes the only thing standing between you and a surprise bear attack. A noble cave woman's fragrance was as carefully selected as her favorite club, the wooden kind, not the dancing kind. Failing to smell like imported luxury? Scandal. The Caveman nose had standards. Regular folks might reek of garlic, wet dog, and existential dread, but the elite? They wafted through cave corridors trailing clouds of crushed wildflowers, muskox, pine sap, and exotic spices imported by some very confused traveling trader. If you walked past the chief's wife and didn't feel mildly enchanted or mildly dizzy, she wasn't trying hard enough. Perfume was big business. The most coveted ingredients came from far away. Resin from the tree that makes you sneeze, myrrh from the lands beyond the great rock, cinnamon from the hot land, and ambergris, the rarest substance of all, rumored to come from the belly of the sea monster. It was outrageously expensive and wildly fashionable. Basically, the cave version of dabbing yourself with luxury whale goo. And scent wasn't just for your wrists. Oh no. They soaked pelts, stitched herbs into the lining of their tunics, and waved perfumed moss at anyone who smelled a little too much like fresh hunt. The caves were crowded. People bathed on the full moon or whenever, and perfume was as much armor as status. For the ambitious beauty, scent layering was essential. Start with a pine needle bath, careful of splinters. Dust yourself with violet petals, rub oil into your temples. Then finish with a heavy spritz of whatever your tribe's shaman swore would bring suitors and ward off angry spirits. Some even wore smell stones, little pouches of sweet grass and berries, tied around the neck or belt, a clear signal to approach with caution. I smell like judgment, and you better respect it. But these potions weren't always safe. Some contained pine tar or river spirits, so strong they could knock you out cold or give you weird dreams about talking beavers. One wrong blend and you went from mysterious to medic. Still, the right fragrance could open cave doors, literally and figuratively. A woman who smelled divine had the power to attract, distract, or just survive a night in a crowd of very sweaty, very unwashed poets. If cave beauty was a battlefield, fashion was the armor, and the clan's main fire pit was its glittering war zone. What you wore didn't just whisper about you. It hollered. It danced. It stomped mammoth tracks all over the muddy floor, declaring your family's hunting record, your mate's status, and whether or not you had any shame in bankrupting him for an extra tufted squirrel cape. Fur was the ultimate flex. Imported, tanned, and sewn with care, usually reserved for new spears. Wearing a full Wolf pelt in the heat of summer? That was a power move. You were boiling, yes, but you were also the alpha. Next up was beadwork, each bead painstakingly carved from bone, shell, or the teeth of something that definitely tried to eat someone. Patterns were status. The more teeth, the more respect. The truly legendary outfits included painted scenes, sometimes entire hunting stories, right on your skirt. Why gossip when you can just point to your thigh? And sleeves? A new invention and a competitive sport. Wealthy cave women kept extra sleeves made of foxtails, rabbit pelts, and braided grass, switching them out to match the weather, the mood, or to show off at the moon festival. Some sleeves were so elaborate they needed their own storage rack, usually the heads of less fashionable rivals. Colors were coded too. Deep berry reds and rare flower blues meant high status, made with dyes so precious they were hidden away in secret cave crevices. Only the top cave women could afford them. But did that stop others from faking it with mashed beetles? Not a chance. Even the underlayers, if you had any, were tricked out. The best tunics were trimmed with the softest fur. Belts doubled as pockets, stashing everything from berry snacks to secret pinnacone notes for clandestine clan drama. But all this style came at a price, sometimes a literal pile of trade beads or an IOU for next winter's bear hunt. Yet noble cave women didn't just own these furs. They needed them. Every gathering was a stage, every outfit a statement. Wearing the same squirrel pelt twice? Social suicide. Fashion didn't stop at the ankles, though no one was really supposed to see those, unless you tripped over a log at the wrong moment. Modesty dictated that a woman's feet be kept decently hidden beneath layers of fur and woven grass, which was a pity because prehistoric footwear was absolutely bonkers. Let's talk about the rock-ups, the most theatrical shoes ever invented. Basically, slabs of wood or smooth river stone strapped to your feet to keep your precious pelts out of the mud, and occasionally to see over the competition. Over time, rock-ups got taller. Some were so high you needed two cousins to walk with you as spotters. If you fell, you didn't just lose dignity, you took out half the campfire circle. For most cave women, shoes were simpler. Leather moccasins for hunting, bark clogs for fishing. But the elite treated shoes like hidden treasures, unseen, impractical, and, of course, dangerously stylish. All of it screamed a single message. Real ladies didn't walk, they glided, they floated, they suffered, but in style. After hours of being powdered, plucked, laced, perfumed, stuffed, and stoned up, what came next? That's right, dancing. Because nothing completes the prehistoric beauty ritual like trying to glide across a muddy cave. Floor in 40 pounds of furs and 2 inches of actual breathing space. Clan dances were serious business. These weren't wild bonfire jigs, no. These were slow, elegant, and choreographed. Every stomp had meaning. The wrong move could mean social disaster. You might as well shout, "I own nothing," and run barefoot through the nettles. For noble cave women, dancing was the final test. The most popular dances, like the moonwalk, not that one, or the bison glide, required you to float in slow circles, keep your chin up, and under no circumstances breathe through your mouth. Undignified. Which was tough, since the corset left about 2 ounces of available air. Every twirl was a calculated gamble against fainting into the stew. And yet, this was crucial. Your grace on the dance floor was as vital as your hunting skills, or your dowry of dried berries. Mothers hired dance tutors, sometimes the village shaman, sometimes a surprisingly nimble old uncle. You learned how to turn, how to bow, how to fan yourself with a leaf, just enough to be mysterious, but not so much you looked like you were fending off bats. The goal? Radiate effortless control, even as your feet blistered and your ribs whimpered for mercy. There was also the matter of social strategy. In caveman times, dancing was more than just wiggling your feet around a smoky fire pit. It was the ultimate way to sneak. A glance at that illegible boulder lifter from the neighboring valley. Gloved hands? Please try. Bear paw mittens fashioned from actual bear paws. Eyes met over a communal berry bowl, and the scents of pine resin and mammoth fat mingled in the smoky air. It was flirtation, cave style, subtle, brief, and performed entirely under the watchful glare of 30 jealous aunties. But caution. If you laughed too loudly, stomped too boldly, or let your squirrel skin skirt flap too high during a twirl, you risked ruining your entire illusion of pious cave womanly elegance. In the background, a choir of judgment hummed louder than the wind, howling through the cave cracks. Other women critiqued your pelt. Is that last season's wolf? Your hair braid height, your mammoth bone posture. Servants whispered, old shamans muttered, and through it all, you had to act like none of it mattered. But it absolutely did. A clumsy spin or an off-rhythm bow could haunt you for moon cycles. So you danced, you smiled, you endured, and as soon as the drums faded, you ran to the back cave to repowder your sweat-streaked mud paint and psych yourself up for round 2. After the feast, the guests had staggered home or fallen asleep under the communal boulder, and the noble cave woman, dazzling, divine, and slightly dying inside, made her way back to her bed of moss and pelts. Sleep? Not so fast. First came the prehistoric night routine, a process less about self-care and more about keeping yourself together for one more day. Step 1, the unmasking. Out came the scratchy lichen cloth, creek water, and a blob of leftover duck egg. The mud-based beauty mask had to be gently scraped off, not because it was fragile, but because scrubbing too hard could take half your face with it. Most women used a mix of wild almond oil and stinky vinegar to lift the day's layers, praying that the complexion beneath hadn't turned into a beetle buffet. Spoiler, it usually had. Next, the hair or whatever survived. carefully, the pins and fake braids, sometimes made from horse tail, sometimes from donated cousin hair, were uncoiled. Any sticky tree sap used to keep the hairline wigs in place had to be dissolved with herbal goo. Ladies hoped the earlier applications of cat dung and quicklime for hair removal hadn't left bald spots. No pressure, right? Now for the corset unlacing a spiritual event. It involved gasping, groaning, and the occasional crack as ribs remembered what it meant to be wild. You could finally breathe not well, but enough to sigh and mutter, "Never again," for the 100th night. Next, your feet were peeled out of their rawhide moccasins, revealing the crushed remains of what were probably toes. If you were lucky, your little sibling brought a warm mud basin with rosemary leaves. If not, you just stared at your feet and wondered if joy was extinct. Finally, you'd rub down with sweet-smelling oils, or, if you were very devout, or just paranoid, you'd slather on an alchemical tonic the shaman swore would keep your youth forever. Never mind that it stank like old copper and maybe contained crushed beetles. Beauty is pain and possibly pestilence. Then, at last, the torch was blown out. Not with a huff too rude, but a delicate puff, like you were apologizing to the flame. You lay back, hairline farther back than last moon, skin slightly more ghostly than the day before, lungs recovering from another round of corset trauma. By tomorrow, you'd do it all again. Because in Caveman times, beauty wasn't just a look, it was a lifestyle. A full-time, high-stakes performance with no intermission. And the audience? Everyone with eyes. Long before cave painting turned into performance art, ancient Caveman tattoos carried their own special meaning deeply rooted in survival, story, and straight-up intimidation. Before the era of stylish scars, most tribal tattoos started as punitive marks. Break the clan rules? You'd get a slug-shaped burn on your arm, or maybe a wobbly mammoth inked on your back, so everyone knew not to trust you with the berry stash. But as time went on, things got more creative. The best hunters and bravest berry foragers began to use tattoos as marks of honor, magic, and identity. In the Cave Age, society was rigidly structured. Shamans had feathers, hunters had bones, everyone else had opinions. Fancy pelts and obsidian jewelry are reserved for the elite, but human nature always finds a loophole. If you couldn't wear fur on the outside, why not wear a story on your skin? And so, full-body tattoos flourished, usually hidden beneath layers of mammoth hide, but revealed in river baths, at moon festivals, or during awkward family reunions. These weren't random scribbles. They were stories, sleeves of swirling saber-tooths, back pieces of heroic bison chases, arms covered in spiral suns, lucky ferns, or the odd stick-figure battle scene. Each tattoo carried meaning. A salmon leaping upstream, well, up your thigh, meant perseverance. A thunderbird on the back meant protection from storms and nosy relatives. Getting these tattoos wasn't for the faint-hearted. There were no machines, no gentle hands, and definitely no antiseptic. The artists, usually the shakiest old guy in the tribe, used sharpened boar bones and wildberry ink, hammered into skin with rhythmic grunts. Sessions lasted hours. Full chest murals could take years, and 3 healers on call. But when it was done, you were a living legend, a walking saga, a mobile museum that everyone wanted at the next bear roast. Of course, not everyone approved. Authorities, the chief's mother-in-law, mostly saw tattoos as the mark of trouble, deviance, or wasteful time that could be spent gathering roots. So the art of skin painting thrived in secret, respected by some, feared by others, and completely ignored by the ruling class, who just didn't get it. These weren't the quiet, contemplative carvings of the shaman's apprentices, or the badge of honor burnt marks of clan firekeepers. These were power statements, visual roars that said, "I don't follow your rules." I live by my own. The more outrageous the story, the more admired the tattoo. It wasn't just skin deep, it was branding Caveman style, in a world where nobody handed you a name unless you earned it with a club or a cunning trick. Some designs referenced famous cave legends or tales acted out by firelight. Heroes like Big Tooth Gore, Sneaky Mimi, or Bone Thrower Mac, even mythical rebels who once challenged the chief and lived to tell the tale, or at least limped away impressively. If your tattoo showed a saber-toothed squirrel biting a volcano, you weren't just tough, you were a legend in your own breakfast. Despite their outsider status, these inked-up rogues and outcasts were crucial to the cave economy. They lent shiny stones, kept order in the wildest mouse parties, and sometimes led the first proto-cave Yakuza, a group called the Underrockers. Their tattoos became both a badge and a warning. Loyalty inside, danger outside. Tattoo caves flourished in this world, not always marked by signs, but known by grunts, rumors, and a trail of discarded boar bones. The best tattooist, Bone Poker the Elder, was a legend whispered about around the embers. To get a tattoo from him was an honor. To endure the hours of stabbing pain was a sign you could handle anything except maybe cold feet. For the Stone Age gambler, rogue, or love-struck troublemaker, tattoos were more than art. They were an identity carved in pain, worn proudly in a tribe that had no place for the strange, the wild, or the different. And while the world remembers caveman tattooing as a macho badge for hunters, fire starters, and troublemakers, women left their mark, too, sometimes quite literally, under the skins and hides of their era. While rarely sung about in the songs of bellowing elders, female tattoos existed quietly, bravely, and sometimes rebelliously beneath layers of fur and propriety. Many were intimate, romantic, or just personal. A lover's symbol scratched onto the inside of the upper arm, or a bison's hoof inked on the hip, hidden from all but the closest firelight companion. This was called love scratching. A popular phrase for tattooed lovers was, "I trust you with my mammoth jerky." It was more than a promise. It was a declaration of loyalty, inked in pain. Some couples even swapped marks, showing mutual commitment beyond the old throw a stone and hope for the best ceremony. Among the wild cave courtesans, those infamous for their berry wine and risky dance, Move's tattoos were a tool of seduction. A little spiraled mark, only visible if the bearskin slipped just right, became part of the allure. For each new admirer, a new line, a new story. Of course, not all stories had happy endings. Some women would scorch or scratch out an old lover's mark, replacing it with a howling wolf or a river that washed away regret. Over time, scars turned into testimonies, love and loss, written for no one but themselves. But for the cave women outside the pleasure grotto, tattoos could also be acts of quiet rebellion. Fisherwomen, berry pickers, or wives of tattooed men sometimes followed suit, an eagle feather here, a river bend there, hidden under pelts as a private badge of autonomy. Even if the elders grumbled, these women wore their ink as silent declarations of power. No cave painting ever recorded their stories, but every mark had meaning. Behind every legendary cave bodysuit, every swirling mammoth and tragic hero carved in flesh stood. The unsung artisans, the bone pokers, the tattoo masters. They worked quietly in smoky alcoves, above the bone-sharpening cave, behind the mammoth hide curtain, or in secret hollows that always smelled of pine resin and burnt fat. No signs, no cave maps, just reputation passed by word of mouth and by the sight of epic tattoos. Becoming a bone poker was no easy feat. Years of poking, practice, and listening to elders yell about, "Back in my day, we used sharp rocks." The tools were basic. A stick with a cluster of boar fangs at the end, dipped in mud ink or crushed berry juice. The process was slow and deeply painful. No numbing moss, no mercy, just rhythmic tapping and the raw sting of every puncture. But the bone poker wasn't just a craftsman. He was a storyteller, a therapist, a wild-eyed philosopher. You came with a request, draw me a giant fish fighting a thundercloud, but bone poker would decide where it went, how it curled, and how it spoke to the soul. Clients returned over many seasons, sometimes for years, to finish their full cave suit, a landscape of ink stretching from shoulder to thigh, down the arms, up the neck, but always stopping just above the wrist and neckline. This wasn't for style. It was so you could hide your marks from the chief's mother-in-law, or from jealous rivals during trade season. Some bone pokers even signed their work, a secret ant symbol hidden in a mammoth's eye, a tiny spiral among the bison horns. Only the wise could spot them. For bone pokers and their clients, the work was dangerous, outlawed, and thrilling. The best stories were told in scars, in sweat, and in whispered legends around the fire. In Caveman world, the pain wasn't a drawback, it was the whole point. The poke and tap method, using a wooden stick and wild boar teeth, was slow. Outlines took all night. Full-body murals might require seasons of effort. There were no shortcuts, No pain-killing leaf. Just endurance, grit, and pride. If you flinched, you risked a crooked saber-tooth, or worse, a public scolding from Bone Poker. Only the bravest finished their full rock suit, leaving a chest panel blank so their battle stories wouldn't shock Grandma during the next family mammoth roast. Every inch of Caveman tattoo told a story. A salmon swimming up your thigh meant persistence. According to legend, a salmon that made it to the top of the falls became a sky eagle. The perfect metaphor for the cave person trying to climb out of the mud and into the stories of the tribe. In the end, body art wasn't just a look. It was a life, a myth, and a monument you wore everywhere, every day. Dragons were everywhere. But in caveman times, these weren't the snarling, fire-breathing monsters of later cave painting myth. No, the cave dragon was a guardian, a slithering, wise protector, deeply tied to the sacred river or the clouds above the valley. A dragon inked across the back wasn't meant to frighten rival clans, though it helped. It was to shield, to protect, a constant presence between your hide and the world's sharp edges. Peacocks painted with berry juice stood for bravery, with a touch of fabulous. Cave tigers symbolized ferocity and resolve, for those who never backed down from a mammoth hunt. Wavy lines meant the unpredictability of life. Every bend a reminder that floods, famines, and falling rocks were just part of the journey. Some braver cavemen added demons or ghostly faces to their skin warnings. Cautionary tailies, inked in charcoal to remind themselves and others that danger lurked in both the world outside and the spirits inside. Many tattoos depicted entire scenes from the tribe's oldest fireside legends. Battles for the waterfall, betrayals in the berry patch, miraculous rescues by Eagle Mother or Bison Father. Popular subjects included the Swollen River Clan, a tale about 108 outcast heroes who overthrew a cruel chief and invented Camille soup. These stories resonated with the tattooed class rebels, misfits, protectors, those who didn't fit into the chief's boring order but still followed a code. A shaman's ink sometimes featured wrathful cave gods figures like Grumpy Rockface, always pictured with a big club and a vine rope, ready to chase away bad spirits or foolish cousins. But not all meanings were the same. Where you got your tattoo mattered. A tiger climbing up your arm meant ambition, aiming to become a clan leader one day. Pointing downward, a warning not to mess with the river spirits. The order of each tattoo: first the hand for bravery, the back for endurance, the cheek for boldness told a personal journey. These symbols were sacred, private, powerful, and in a world where words could betray you or just be misheard over the wind, tattoos became the most honest expression a caveman could muster. But as time passed, the vibrant underground world of cave ink once a secret sign of honor among berry pickers, fire starters, and mushroom finders began to collide with shifting tribal attitudes and growing paranoia from the ruling elders. What was once admired in smoky caves or wild boulder parties slowly became associated with deviance and troublemaking. The turning point came when the elders tightened their grip on public behavior. Tattoos, already frowned upon by the chief's mother-in-law, started to take on a more dangerous reputation, especially as they became more visible among the Underrockers and the rogue trade clans. These rebels, the first proto-cave Yakuza, were often just misfits who wanted to reclaim identity, not provoke fear. But as their secret meetings became more organized trading rare firestones, running dice games in mossy hollows, the stigma attached to their marks grew. The elders didn't care if your dragon symbolized courage or your river waves meant perseverance. To them, tattoos now meant only one thing: trouble. The Cave Council responded with more bans. In the year of the upside-down tree, tattooing was outlawed, at least officially. But enforcement depended on which elder you ran into and how much honey wine they'd had. Still, the bone pokers went further underground. Sessions were booked in code, with clients sometimes hiding their marks under layers of mud or animal fat, blending them into bigger designs to fool the snooping elders. A stigma wasn't just official, it was social. Anyone visibly tattooed could be refused entry to the big fire, barred from moon dances, or denied marriage by any respectable family. Unless your tattoos were really cool, then maybe exceptions were made after dark. Tattooed bodies became taboo. The art, once a mark of bravery or spiritual power, was now recast as something vulgar or even evil. But the tattoos didn't disappear. They simply went deeper, under the skin and under the radar. For every crackdown, there was a new design, a better hiding spot, a bolder caveman willing to endure pain for something that meant more. Cave ink didn't die. It went into hiding like a coiled dragon behind a waterfall. As the tribe stepped into the modern age, which meant better cave roofs and less accidental fires, the new generation was eager to impress distant visitors and civilize. In this image of new order, tattoos had no place. Elders declared all skin marks embarrassing, savage, shameful. Foreigners, usually lost traders from over the mountains, were horrified by the epic body murals worn by Caveman's working class, and the chief responded by pushing tattooing deeper underground than ever. Yet, even as it was banned for Caveman citizens, tattoos became a tourist attraction. Wandering Neanderthal traders and distant hill folk sought out bone pokers to take home their own exotic cave art, sometimes a spiral, sometimes a tiny mammoth on the knee. Ironically, the very art the tribe tried to bury was being preserved by the very outsiders whose approval they craved. The tradition didn't die. Bone pokers adapted. They changed clients, moved deeper into secret caves, and passed their techniques down in whispers. The tools, stories, and methods survived in tight families or secret tattoo circles. As centuries rolled on, cave ink became entangled with the Underrockers. The full rock suit, hidden beneath thick furs, became a symbol of loyalty and risk. Once again, tattoos were about pain, honor, secrecy, but now without the innocent magic of old bison legends or waterfall epics. The art was still there. The public just pretended not to see. Even today, the legacy lingers. Despite modern cave interest in tattooing, some big fires and river baths still ban tattooed cavemen. Fear of trouble lives on, even when the ink is just a doodle of a squirrel. But times shift. Young cave artists reclaim tattooing, not as rebellion, but as heritage. Storytellers and cave painters preserve ancient designs. Artists and wise women finally admit the skill and beauty. And a new generation is asking, why should we hide our own skin? In a world built on layers of furs, of stories, of secrets, remains the most honest expression the tribe ever tried to cover up. And that's exactly what made these secret hide scrolls so dangerous. To the elder matriarchs, they meant the tribe's traditions were slipping. To the ancient firekeepers, they threatened the sacred order. But for the cave folk actually sneaking these treasures under their mammoth furs hunters, weavers, berry pickers, even young shaman apprentices, they were something else entirely. Power. Not the kind you won bashing skulls in a bison stampede or outgrunting a rival, but the quieter, more cunning kind that comes alive in the shadows near the hearth. In an age when bodies were bartered for firewood, voices were shushed with a stern grunt, and desires had to be carved in code, these scrolls offered a secret script. Here, love wasn't always arranged by the marrow counters. Here, pleasure could be named, sometimes with a splash of berry juice on hide, sometimes with a sly mark scratched in stone. Curiosity didn't have to be confessed to the council. It could flicker safely by torchlight behind the fish-drying racks. Whether it was a love charm carved into a birch stick, a censored riddle etched on a river pebble, or a poem painted with forbidden ochre at midnight, each one was a little rebellion wrapped in animal hide. And let's not forget the men. For all their bravado at the marrow feast and all their boasting around the communal fire, they too stashed scrolls beneath their bedding, swapped carved pebbles behind the elders' backs, and sketched their own anatomical diagrams when the hunt got slow. Human nature has always known how to hide what matters. The Forbidden Scroll wasn't just a prehistoric quirk. It was the proof that once a tribe realized stories and drawings could stir something deep, wild and secret, there was no going back to just counting bones and staring at the moon. Most of these treasures didn't survive. They were lost in floods, nibbled by goats, or burned to cinders in a fit of tribal purification. But a few endured. They linger today in hidden crevices, tucked inside ancient baskets, or retold around the fire by sly grandmothers, still humming with the echoes of laughter and longing. Because the Stone Age wasn't just about flint and fear, it was about forbidden's fun too. Beneath every age of order, whether set by matriarch or mammoth hunter, runs a wild river of mischief and longing. Sometimes all it takes to change a tribe is a riddle scratched behind the bison mural, a love charm buried in the berry cache, or a secret poem whispered during a midnight watch, cherished by someone daring enough to want more. Because in the end, the caveman era didn't just teach us how to survive, it taught us how to want. So the next time you wander through a cave, staring at painted mammoths and handprints glowing in torchlight, remember, the real stories weren't always drawn in plain view. Sometimes they lived between the cracks, scratched in secret, swapped at moon feasts, risked for, longed for, and sometimes washed away in the rain. In an age obsessed with order, these forbidden scrolls were portals to chaos, laughter, and the one thing every era tries to hide, the unruly heart. They remind us that beneath every age of reason and every pile of mammoth bones, a river of longing flows on. And sometimes all it takes to change a world is a charm carved on a pebble, a poem painted by firelight, or a secret scroll hidden behind the marrow jar, cherished by someone bold enough to want more. Because in the end, the Stone Age didn't just teach us to make fire. It taught us how to desire.